welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar on investigating police misconduct. I am joined by three incredible panelists who I will have introduce themselves in just a minute. I will start by introducing myself and Michelle, who is sort of my Zoom mastermind and assistant on this webinar. So my name is Ivy Scott. I work as a community engagement reporter here at the Marshall Project St. Louis. And so my responsibility is to make sure that our work is directly reflective of and responsive to the needs and interests of the community. So I spend a lot of time with community members trying to get a sense of what's important to them and then thinking about how our work can better reflect those priorities. Michelle runs our Investigate This initiative, which is an initiative that we started at the Marshall Project to enable local reporters, particularly in areas that might not have a ton of reporting resources, to do investigations similar to the ones that we do here. And so those often come with data, they come with sources, they come with really everything that we think and that we hope a reporter would need to sort of get started and pull off the kinds of investigations that we do. And we actually have now two Missouri-specific toolkits in addition to our series of national toolkits that are designed for reporters across the country. We have two here in Missouri that I think Michelle is actually going to put in the chat as we speak. So just wanted to sort of flag those in case there's interest. We also have consultations. So if there is an issue that you're interested in covering that's related to one of our toolkits, you're welcome to reach out to us. And we are happy to get a reporter who sort of covers that area of expertise on the phone with you to chat through any questions you might have. With that being said, I'm now going to let our panelists introduce themselves. I'm just going to go in the order that they appear on my screen. So we will start with Katie Moore.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Katie Moore. I'm a reporter alongside Ivy here in St. Louis with the Marshall Project. I cover obviously policing and misconduct, as well as the death penalty and prison conditions in Missouri. Before joining the Marshall Project in 2024, I was a reporter for several years at the Kansas City Star, where I was covering several different issues related to policing, including racism within the Kansas City Police Department, and specific incidents of police use of force and allegations of misconduct.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. Next, we have James Wyrsch.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jim Wyrsch. I'm an attorney at the law firm Kazali Wyrsch in St. Louis. I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and we only do civil rights and immigration, so a lot of police misconduct cases.
Thanks so much, Jim. And last but certainly not least, we have Ray Rice.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Rice. I'm a retired lieutenant from St. Louis County Police Department, where I spent 29 years. I'm also an adjunct professor at Lindenwood University, and I teach courses in the criminal justice program.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie, Jim, and Ray again for joining us. I'm going to launch into a few questions that I have, and then we will open it up for questions from our attendees. I'm going to put this information in the chat as well, but feel free to submit questions to our Q&A section as you think of them. I'm going to be keeping an eye on that as I'm asking my questions, and it will be very helpful for me in terms of letting me know when it's time to sort of stop what it is that I have to say and turn it over to you guys. So when you submit your questions, if you could just include your name, if it's not already sort of in your Zoom user, and then just your affiliation, if you're in school, if you're working, just what it is that you do. So I will put this information in the chat as well, and then we will jump right in. So Katie, I am going to start with you because for those who are not already familiar, this webinar is sort of a spin-off of a toolkit that we recently published that is designed to help local reporters cover police misconduct in the state of Missouri. And that toolkit came about after some reporting that Katie did last year about the number of police misconduct cases in the St. Louis area and in Missouri more broadly that led to her actually creating a database database of all of the complaints that have been filed with post against officers around the state. So Katie, would you mind just starting by telling us a little bit about this database, what it is that prompted you to create it, and what you noticed once you were able to start comparing agencies and officers and sort of putting the database to work?
Yeah, so I began looking at a portal that is run by the Administrative Hearing Commission. I had not heard of that body until somebody told me that it existed, and I started playing around with it and quickly found out that it was very hard to find information in there related to misconduct unless you specifically knew like an officer's name. And so to kind of get around that and try to look at the database more holistically, not just, one specific incident or one specific officer, I started compiling my own database, manually going through the portal and compiling the information from the complaints that had been filed with the Administrative Hearing Commission. And the complaints really kind of varied. They had the name of the officer, obviously, but then from there, it kind of just, was kind of a crapshoot. Some of them didn't even have the department where the officer was working at the time of the allegation. So that made it a challenge in, making our database more complete. But then just started filling in my spreadsheet of, what was the complaint about? When did it happen? And after, I think there were 627 cases in that portal, and was able to then kind of zoom out and look at what was going on, um, finding patterns. Were there officers who had had more than one complaint? How many of those, were there? Were there certain geographic locations? So if you're a reporter in a certain area and you're only interested in XYZ city, you can search through the database that we've made by, geographic area. And also looking at just the nature of the complaints. So I ended up just kind of making categories that I saw as the most common. So driving under the influence was the most common one, but then going through and looking at more serious allegations. There were several like child sex abuse cases. There were several involving people who had died. And so looking at the seriousness and then kind of the outcome, you're able to get the current roster of police officers from the Department of Public Safety. So, asking them specific names about the licensing status as of today. So are they still licensed? Are they still working? And if so, where are they working?
That's super helpful. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask one quick follow-up question, and then I'm going to turn to Ray to ask him about how police misconduct is handled within the department. But just because you had mentioned sort of it being difficult to kind of track like where officers have been, I'm curious if you had any thoughts or any advice for reporters who are like looking at that sort of specific issue. I know that here they refer to it as the Muni Shuffle, where an officer can be accused of misconduct in one place and then find their way to another department. Is there any, I guess, advice or tips that you learned through your reporting process for how to figure out if an officer is hopping from one place to another?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's pretty challenging in Missouri, unlike many other states where you could get like an officer's full history and the dates where they were employed at a specific department. But through at least the Department of Public Safety, they will only give you the current snapshot. So I could ask for it today and it would show the officers today. Um, so what I have been doing and what I would suggest is to sunshine for those rosters regularly through the Department of Public Safety and then any other local police departments that you're specifically interested in reporting on. And so then you can track, who has been hired, who has left in the past, if you do it quarterly, in the past 3 months. And that is not a perfect way to be able to kind of figure out what's going on, but it does provide some history if you can do that regularly.
Thanks so much. Ray, I wanted to turn to you next. Can you just sort of walk us through how allegations of police misconduct are handled within the department from the time that you worked there? And one thing that I was particularly curious about is that process different at all if it is another police officer who is making that complaint versus a civilian?
Good question. Thanks. Um, The short answer is most police departments sort complaints into two lanes. You have the administrative internal affairs lane, which is complaints about policy violations, professionalism, truthfulness, use of force, those types of things. And then you have criminal investigations, whether it's a civilian, an internal employee, or whatever, that is an allegation that could potentially lead to criminal charges. So, and then that's how they're separated. And so those are handled in two different ways. Administrative investigations that are not subject to a criminal prosecution are handled by internal affairs. The criminal allegations are separated not only by unit, but also by, to keep, um, you know, uh, officers have garrity protection. So as an employee, they are compelled to answer questions related to policy violations and things of that nature. So they can't use those compelled answers as part of a criminal investigation, sort of like a police officer's Miranda rights for internal use. And it doesn't really matter if it comes from a civilian or an employee. What happens most often is when it's a civilian, there's usually information that is gathered um, from body worn camera, um, whether the location had videotape versus an employee on employee. There's usually no videotaping of employee encounters. It's a he say, she said type of situation. So usually more information is potentially able to be gathered when it's a civilian complaint because it usually results from either what we call a pedestrian check or some encounter that resulted from a police action, either 911 call or traffic stop. And most of the time nowadays, those are on video, body worn cameras, in-car cameras, and around the community. And so from that point, the complaint is either started or initiated by the supervisor that was first contacted, or if the civilians go straight to a department's internal affairs department. So then once the officer, basically by state statute, the Missouri Bill of Rights, the officer has to be notified that he or she is under investigation. Um, the complaint has to be reduced into writing with the identifying information of the complainant. That information is supposedly or typically held confidential until there's a time that it may go into lawsuit or disciplinary action and a challenge to the validity of um, the accusation.
That's
Is
super
that
helpful. Yes, no, that's perfect. That is actually super robust and a really helpful framing. My follow-up question, just because you had mentioned sort of the distinction between things that are confidential and things that can be public. You had touched on the Officer Bill of Rights that was passed in Missouri, I believe it was in 2021, that has now made a lot of these internal affairs documents confidential. I'm curious for journalists who are interested, maybe they've like got a tip or they've heard something about an accusation of police misconduct. Are there any kinds of records? Are there any places they should consider looking with the fact, I guess, with that Officer Bill of Rights in mind, where they might be able to get a sense, even a general sense of what that allegation is about?
Yes, it's, to use an analogy or whatever euphemism is follow the smoke around the fire. So, as I said, most citizen complaints are the result of some type of police action, and that police action is either a result of a 911 call or a traffic stop or something that was radioed in to dispatch. So even though the actual complaint and the officer information surrounding the complaint may be deemed under a personnel file, you can typically find the what, where, and the incident details based on CAD report, the computer assisted dispatch. So it will have the time of day, the location, and typically whether or not EMS was called, and some of the inputs that the dispatch typed to the officer or the responding officers at the time. So all of that doesn't they can be gathered without getting directly to the personnel file. So you can find out what happened and line it up with what the citizen or what the complainant is alleging based on the location, the time, and then the details that are in the dispatch log.
I like this idea of following the smoke around the fire. I think that that's a really smart approach. Jim, I wanted to turn to you next because something that I have experienced in my past life as a police reporter is the number of times that very interesting information about police misconduct cases can appear in court records. And so I wanted to ask you first if you could sort of walk us through, are there certain kinds of police misconduct allegations or accusations that most frequently result in litigation, where it's like, if, I think of use of force as an example, like if there's a use of force allegation, you can be pretty confident that you would be able to find some litigation about that if you looked online?
Sure. I mean, you have to look on a case by case basis as far as the legal stuff goes. But I think the most common stuff that we deal with from a police standpoint, we also do prisons and jail work. But from the police is excessive force, including but not limited to police shootings. And then, other things that come in are like, I just filed one recently about just a wrongful search and stop of someone who they just detained on the side of the road for 45 minutes without any reason to do so. But I think the bread and butter of what we do is excessive force and police shootings.
And what kinds of records or information are often found in those cases? Like if I'm a reporter, let's say I'm pretty new to this and I'm just poking around on the docket, what I guess are the kinds of documentation that I should be looking for that would sort of give me insight into what it is that happened there?
So I think the biggest sources of that information would be complaints and summary judgment motions. Complaints are going to lay out some allegations that the lawyer knows about at the time. Summary judgment motions are places where there's a more fully developed record. The problem you're going to have as a reporter is because of all the protections that are given to personnel records, most courts in Missouri will deem those personnel records as confidential. So they'll normally be filed under seal. But, we've had situations where I remember getting a nasty gram about some private information that was published by the local NPR station. And it turned out when we dug into it, they thought we had leaked it somehow. But it turned out that the city had just not requested certain protections on a filing that they made. And that the judge had just, because the judges, and especially in the Eastern District of Missouri, will scrutinize the pleadings to determine what stuff should be filed under seal and which stuff should be public. And in that particular case, the lawyer for the city didn't object to a bunch of stuff being published, and so it came out. So dig into those. The summary judgment motions tend to have the most deposition transcripts, tend to have most records, tend to have most evidence that's developed in the case and law that will often reflect misconduct.
And just for the uninitiated, can you just explain briefly what a summary judgment motion is?
Sure. So, once you file your complaint and you go through the initial process of answering or filing a motion to dismiss, then the parties engage in months of discovery. We're exchanging paper documents, videos, emails, text messages, and then and sometimes we'll always be asking for misconduct reports, prior misconduct by the officers involved. And then once all that is discovered and you do your depositions and everything else, the state or the city will most likely then file what they call a motion for summary judgment that says, here's all the evidence that's been adduced in the case that's favorable to us, and based on all this evidence, we win. But they have to be, you're laying out, there's a thing called a statement of facts where you're laying out all the uncontroverted facts, and they have to put evidence in support of all those facts. So that's where you get affidavits, you get depositions, you get videos, you get police reports. All that stuff will be attached to those motions. And then the other side will then get to respond to that and say, here's why you're wrong. And they attach their own depositions, exhibits, affidavits, videos, all that stuff too. So that tends to be the most fulsome place where you're going to find just a ton of evidence about the case, which can sometimes involve misconduct claims.
Got it. Super helpful. The last quick question I just wanted to ask before I turn it back over to Katie is there a distinction between the types of cases that are filed in state versus federal court when it comes to these civil rights claims?
It's all different lawyers have different ideas about the jurisdictions that they operate in, and some people just might find that some cases are more appropriate for St. Louis City versus federal court, and some cases can only be brought in federal court. Certainly First Amendment violations. A lot of the protest litigation that we did was all federal because that's really kind of a federal animal. But Fourth Amendment claims, excessive force claims can also be battery claims in state court, and it just depends on the preference of the lawyers and what they think is a better venue for them.
Got it. So reporters should check both places, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And the nice thing about Missouri compared to other states is the court records, the state records are just as easily accessible as the federal ones, if not more. I don't think you need to pay for them like you do for Pacer. It's a really good place to find records, and I think a lot of reporters already do get alerts from certain cases and see when certain things are filed and go grab those records that are pretty easily available.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Katie, a question for you about safety. I have been in the position of the eager reporter before where, you think you have an allegation against somebody, you want to investigate it. But obviously it can be challenging, particularly I think for journalism students or early career reporters, to strike the balance between really digging in on an investigation and not jeopardizing their safety. I'm curious if you have sort of advice or thoughts on where to draw that line. I'm thinking about like maybe we shouldn't be like tiptoeing around their house at night and that kind of thing. But I'm just sort of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, definitely. If there are questions or concerns, you should talk to your editor to see kind of if they have any guidance. But I would say that, you should pursue reporting based on things that you can verify. And sometimes that is a very long and grueling process. But if there are, enough accounts from different people or enough records to back up a tip that you're getting, then I think you have a little more leeway at that point to be a little bit more aggressive in your reporting. But obviously, you want to, not go in someone's yard or something, and you also want to know your rights as, a citizen and as a reporter. What are your rights in case, you are stopped or something, there is some kind of encounter with law enforcement.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ray, another question for you. This one about sourcing. Oftentimes, and this I think is sort of a long legacy now, people talk a lot about the mistrust that exists between the police department and journalists. I'm curious if you have advice for reporters looking to build sourcing with police officers. And I think particularly for reporters who want to sort of have those like genuine, open relationships that are not clouded by that history of mistrust.
Yeah, that's a really difficult situation nowadays that most police departments have passed policies that limit their interaction with media and require a direction to the PIOs of that department. But I would suggest that the best way is to develop relationships with the associations, which are officers that belong to the associations working in the police departments, whether it's the St. Louis Police Officer Association, FOP, or Ethical Society of Police, because those officers typically have a quid pro quo relationship with media, because obviously, based on the adversarial relationship at times within the department, it's necessary to get information out to the public. So that is a beneficial relationship to build with those particular officers that belong, or either the board members or those officers who belong to those associations have some level of protection against the policy, because they can speak on behalf of the association versus saying that they are speaking as a representative of the department that they work for. So, because it would be difficult to establish those types of relationships with the regular beat officer who has a hell of a lot to risk if if it was to come out that they were providing information to the media.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And do you find that that sort of sense of apprehension is as true for smaller police departments as it is for the bigger ones?
It's probably worse. It in smaller police departments, the chief has a lot more individual power to hold, to jeopardize the potential of, career progression, retaliation in ways that larger departments have governing boards, whether it's the police commission, whether it's the city or the county. So you have avenues to actually um, seek some type of, I guess, reprieve as an officer if you feel like you're being retaliated against because of some, a whistleblower status of something that you said. So I would think that it would be much worse in smaller agencies than in larger agencies.
Got it. That's good to know. I'm seeing a good amount of questions in our Q&A, so I'm just going to ask one more question of Jim and of Katie, and then I'll turn it over to the Q&A. One thing I did forget to mention earlier is that we do also have the chat function. I should have shouted at the chat function earlier. So if there is like other thoughts, feelings, links, resources that anybody who is attending wants to share, please feel free to use the chat function for that. The Q&A is specifically just for questions for our panelists, so I'll sort of be going through that in the next few minutes and organizing the questions for that section. Before I do that, though, Jim, my question for you is sort of along the similar lines as the one that I asked to Ray. I'm curious what your thoughts are on how reporters who are covering police misconduct can start to build relationships with attorneys who litigate these cases, and just to sort of stay in the know about, if there's going to be upcoming filings or motions and that kind of thing, if you have any thoughts on that.
I think that's a lot easier than with police officers. Um, now, anyone who knows my partner will know that different people have different approaches to the media. I'm generally more quiet, and other my partners not. Um, but no, I think just calling people up when they file a lawsuit, if they're interested in it, interested in learning more. You know, some people might be willing to go on the record. Some people might be willing to do background more. But I think anyone who just shows an interest in a case, unless there's some reason not to, I think lawyers are often willing to share what information they can. But of course, like I said before, there's protective orders and things like that that get in the way of being able to disclose certain information. But I think generally lawyers are amenable to having conversations about their lawsuits, if only for ego.
And are there things that you find that journalists either like get wrong in their coverage, or particularly for sort of quick turnaround coverage, like nuance that you wish was added, or angles to the story that you feel like aren't often taken up that you wish were more often?
I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think mine's more big picture that I think there's so much credence given to the official report when so many instances those reports tend to be, if not, I wouldn't say not necessarily outright fabrications, but a lot of nuance is lost in those things. I don't know how you fix that as a journalist, but I think there's a lot of just straight reporting what the police say without much uh, skepticism or digging deeper as you can into those facts to see if they're actually true.
That's super helpful.
I
Um,
actually, I
yeah.
actually have a prime example recently about this. Um, I guess about 2 weeks ago, maybe 10 days, the Post-Dispatch did an article about the new policy as far as body-worn cameras in the city police department, that a significant number of officers weren't turning on their body-worn cameras during encounters with the public. And the article focused more on the cost that, the city spent $5 million to outfit the officers with body worn cameras, and the contract is coming up for renewal for another 6 million. But I would like for when public safety is being covered, that the focus be what is detrimental to the safety of the public. So in this particular article, there are so many other questions that are detrimental or that weren't answered that are detrimental to public safety. For instance, what type of calls are these officers not turning on their body worn cameras for? Is it happening in specific precincts, specific encounters? Are they not turning them on during uses of force? All of those questions were failed to be asked and answered in this particular article that are much more important than how much they spent to outfit the officers who are not turning them on.
That's a super helpful example. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, Katie, the last question I'm going to throw over to you, and it is in a similar vein, but it's focused more on collaboration. I'm curious, as you've been collecting this database, I know something that came up is the idea that it's a little impossible to track the movement of some of these officers all around the state, and then sometimes even out of states. I know that there were instances in the database where the officers were formerly employed in Arkansas or other neighboring states. And so I'm curious if you could just sort of talk about ways that you think that journalists could work together more or collaborate across their various areas of coverage to sort of paint a more comprehensive picture of police misconduct in the state.
Yeah, I think here at the Marshall Project, we definitely encourage all kinds of partnerships and collaboration. And I think it really just helps with, if you're partnering with another outlet, you have more resources. And then once the story is published, you get a different audience. And by working together, specifically on something like police misconduct, I'm not going to know the law in Arkansas or Illinois as well as I do Missouri. So if there's an officer that has moved from Arkansas to here, if there's an outlet that you're familiar with, or even if you're not, reaching out and just seeing if there's a reporter there who's familiar with, presumably that person has appeared in some kind of news article. So, reaching out to that reporter to see what they know, what their knowledge base is. Sometimes that can lead to, an actual full partnership for a story, but it just helps to have that knowledge across different areas where, I'm not going to know the Arkansas FOIA law or that particular police department's policies on misconduct. So I think that really working together, you will expand your knowledge base and be able to have stronger reporting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to open it up now to the questions that have popped up in our Q&A. I am going to really enter multitasking mode here. I will be posing some of these questions to you all live, and then there's a few of them that I think I can answer in the chat, so I will try to do that simultaneously. Actually, Katie, I'm going to start with you. We have sort of two questions from two different people, but I'll put them together. The first one is from Dina Knotts from Collectively Changing Corrections, and she's curious about how far back police misconduct can be investigated. She's mentioning cases and allegations from 20 years ago or more, and is just curious, is there an avenue for looking at cases that go that far back?
Yeah, I think there are definitely disadvantages to having a case that is several, years or even decades old. But the one advantage is that it's presumably a closed investigation. And so you should be able to FOIA or Sunshine for that entire case file. And so you should be able to get all the information related to the criminal investigation. If there are allegations of police misconduct, that might be trickier. But you should be able to at least get some of the information, and it depends on kind of what the prisoner's allegation is, and maybe James or Ray could speak to this more, but presumably if there is some kind of violation where like they hid evidence, that could potentially be brought up in court today.
Yeah. Jim or Ray, I don't know if you want to comment at all on that, on these sort of older allegations, if they come up at all, even now in court at all. Katie, my other sort of related question for you, this is from Zay Thompson at the at the Kansas Federal Public Defender Investigator. Um, was curious whether or not the database that you created is ongoing, or is that like information only current up to like a certain point in time this year?
Yeah, so the reporting, the original story published last year, last May, and so the information is up to date as of then. I am planning on at least going back and collecting the complaints that have been entered in the past year or so into the administrative hearing portal. So at least we have those in case for some reason like they decide they want to take that portal down or whatever for some other reason. Um, but in terms of updating like the licensing status and that part of it, that's probably going to be a snapshot from last year. And if you wanted like the current or up-to-date information, you could get it from the Department of Public Safety pretty easily.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, now we're going to turn to a couple questions for Ray. I from Josh Merchant. There's a question about state control. I know that obviously state control has been a big issue here in St. Louis City. Also, state control, there's a history of it in Kansas City. If you have any thoughts on how state control complicates police accountability reporting, does it make it any more or less challenging to access records, to learn information, even to navigate talking to like the PIO or the media officer if you're a reporter?
Since I don't have any experience working in the city under state control or those, I can only speak to my opinion. As far as the overall operations of the police department to include um, transparency and things of that nature, I don't see state control being any more of a hindrance. In some ways, it actually could be beneficial because they don't, the border police commissioners don't answer to the mayor. And so there's the lack of, or there's the potential for political influence to release information or not, provide information accurately is not something that they're subject to. So it could be a good thing from that aspect of it. For instance, with, particularly in crime reporting, crime statistics, almost every city mayor and chief have touted, a drop in violent crime or homicides and things of that nature. And most recently, some of those, as far as the homicide clearance rate was exposed to be not necessarily accurate, it was semantics. So, in that way, state control with the board that answers or that was appointed by the governor, there is the potential for more transparency, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Katie, I'll actually open this question up to you because I'm remembering now that you used to work in Kansas City, obviously, and now are here. In the course of your reporting for the story you did last year, did you find that there were any particular hurdles that were caused by the state takeover of the police department, or did it seem to be pretty similar to reporting that you had done otherwise?
I wouldn't say specific to this story, but just speaking from having been in Kansas City, and now in St. Louis, that's under state control, and just looking at, I would say you want to look at the agendas for the Board of Police Commissioners in either of the cities. That is a super helpful place to start in terms, like I know in St. Louis right now, the budget is a huge issue, the employee contracts. So that is a good jumping off place to start looking into some of the issues that might be going on. And um, I would say that it is um, not more difficult with being under state control, but you have to find other avenues to sometimes get that information since, you know, it can be limited what you can get from the board members themselves. I didn't have much luck ever in Kansas City talking to any of the commissioners there. So.
Yeah, that's good to know. Ray, another question.
Can,
Oh, sorry.
can
Do you
I
want to hop
add?
in, Jim? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say this, that I think I want to advocate for local control. I mean, I get that there's politics, there's always going to be politics, but one nice aspect about local control with having a mayor there is that the public can put pressure on that mayor to be more transparent and to offer more information. And I think when you have a board of commissioners and then a governor, on top of that, insulating all of that, it's a much less, and the board seems to be very just on the side of the police officers. They don't seem to be, um, uh, uh, you know, objective in their viewpoint. I think it's much harder to put that kind of pressure to make things more transparent. So I do think there's a huge advantage in local control on that issue.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And then also just note, I think this has popped up in our Q&A, but I think it was meant to go in the chat, that somebody was also making a note that the Civilian Oversight Board has much less latitude and authority now to meet and to talk policy with the state control. So thank you for whoever it is that flagged that.
Well, they have zero. They have zero.
Yes. So thank you for whoever just put that in our messages. Ray, the other question that I have for you, this is from Kay McCoy, who was curious about the Ethical Society of Policing support for ending qualified immunity. So sort of asking you to put on your retired VP of ESOP hat here. If you could just sort of talk about, like, was that a bit of a no-brainer for ESOP to advocate in favor of ending qualified immunity? Was that a big discussion? Sort of what that process was like for you guys.
So yes, the advocation for the revocation of qualified community immunity is, as an organization, especially under Heather Taylor and past leadership, the goal is always to make policing more accountable, more transparent, and just. And so when you have the ability for officers to go unpunished for, violations of civil rights or things of that nature, under the guise of they were acting in an official capacity, we think that is contrary to not only, justice, but relationship building that's necessary for the community and the police departments to work together, in fighting crime and making people safe.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, I set of questions. I think I'll put these to everybody, but maybe I will start with you, Jim. There's questions about when law enforcement is uncooperative with records requests, sort of what your avenues are as a reporter. Obviously, as an attorney, you have some different avenues because you can subpoena records that we cannot. But sort of if yeah, what you've seen work, and if there's sort of other types of information that you'll seek out, such as video footage and things like that, if you're having trouble getting records.
Yeah, I mean, the Sunshine Law is your friend. I know there's limitations on what you can get, but the more you can push, a lot of it is depending on the entity you're dealing with. The larger the entity, the slower the bureaucracy is going to be, and so the more that you can push them and keep them in I'll send a sunshine request out to some small county in outstate Missouri, and I'll get a response in days. I send a similar request to the city, and it takes 60, 90 days to get, you need to push and push and push and threatens sunshine suits or file sunshine suits. So you just have to be diligent and obtaining that information and pushing for that information. One other source that I would, encourage people to sort of seek out is there are activist groups, CapCar in St. Louis, other places that have done their own work of doing sunshine requests on police settlements, police shootings, and people have done some of that work already. And worst, you can talk to them about what they've done and how they've done it, to get some information from them about how to get that. Because like you said, as lawyers, our sunshine abilities are a little wider because if we're representing someone in a civil suit, we have access to more information. But a lot of folks out there are really very diligent and have figured out how to get that information and put it in spreadsheets and databases to record those things over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll actually also echo what Ray said earlier about following the smoke around the fire. I think that, 911 calls, EMS records, all of those can also be helpful places to find information that is sort of related to the types of incidents you might be looking for.
And
Sorry, go.
but just to add something to that from personal experience, also working as James said, the larger agencies. That is a common practice to intentionally stall, delay unless the journalists and the organization that they work for are actually willing to show that they have teeth behind their request, in terms of willing to sue for violations of sunshine law. And so when that doesn't happen, the organizations just ignore the sunshine request.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have encountered that. So I can attest that that is in fact very true. Um, I'm also curious. We have a question in the chat that I hope I'm interpreting correctly, but feel free to re-ask it, EJ, if this is not what you meant. But about to what extent former law enforcement can be considered reliable sources, and I'm assuming that this is less for like sworn legal testimony and more just for conversations they have with reporters. And so, Ray, I'm curious. You now having left the department after so many years serving. Would you consider or would you advise reporters to reach out to retired or former members of law enforcement to gain a better understanding of how the department works?
Definitely. Not just reporters. I would suggest attorneys do so as well. I've offered my services to several attorneys that were suing the county department for constitutional violations, use of force, things of that nature. Because when you've worked inside the organization, you know where the skeletons are hidden. And if the attorneys don't know what questions to ask or who to bring into a deposition, um, it makes their ability to make the case, a lot less, it's easier when when you have someone that is willing to share that information to go like, you need to talk to this person. Because a lot of times organizations don't keep records so that they don't have something to give as evidence. So you have a person who knows, right? So you can subpoena all of the records that you want, but if they intentionally, for instance, if they intentionally don't keep disqualification records for minorities and what reasons were minorities being disqualified for, and then you have someone that brings a suit for discrimination because they weren't hired, and you subpoena the records to show all of the minorities who were disqualified and for what reasons, and they didn't keep those records, you don't have the evidence you need to support the case. But if you know who to ask and who to bring into the deposition, who has that information, that's invaluable. So it's definitely important, not just for journalists, but for attorneys that are seeking, that have litigation against police organizations.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, our last set of questions are slightly off topic, but Jim, they're for you, and I do believe that you can answer them, so I'm going to put them to you anyway.
Yep.
They are about seeking pro bono legal representation. We have two questions here about people who are incarcerated and sort of what are the available avenues for seeking pro bono legal representation. So I'm just sort of curious if you can speak to that from your familiarity with the legal landscape here in the St. Louis area.
Sure. It's tough. There's just not a lot of organizations in town that handle this kind of work. And we just lost the MacArthur Justice Center. They're shutting down in May, and they were one of the very important players in this. And so there's only so many resources to go around. We get a lot of letters from inmates, and they're just tough, and it's tough to find those. I mean, the places you'd want to go for pro bono representation would be, potentially some of the bigger law firms. A lot of them have pro bono programs, and I don't, it would be good if organizations like the ones that are posing the questions could establish relationships with those pro bono coordinators, because I think it's hard for people to just assess cases when they're just getting a letter. We get lots of them, and we have to sift through them and find the ones that we think are meritorious enough to pursue. It's hard, but with the big law firms, you've got a bunch of young associates who are looking for trial experience, and they're looking for different ways to do their pro bono work, and they normally have one lawyer that's dedicated to that. So if you can get those organizations in touch with them, and they can start maybe having that relationship to get those lawyers, Otherwise, for small firms like us, it's hard. We do pro bono work, but it's hard because we also have to keep the lights on. Um, but it's just tough, and I wish, I just hope that there's more organizations that can pop up. We had more coming after 2014. That's when MacArthur came here. That's when our city defenders really blew up in size. But there's just we just need more lawyers dedicated to this kind of work in the area to be able to offer those services to those folks. Because I know there's tons of people in those jails and prisons who are not getting representation for valid claims. But there's so many barriers in the way, and one of them is just the lack of lawyers to do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned, some of these larger law firms that have all of these young, eager lawyers. Are there like, what are the sort of like big law players in Missouri?
So you got Brian Cave, Polsinelli, Thompson Coburn, Hush Effenberger, Armstrong Teasdale, um, and y- I think the guy Amy just mentioned Hush Blackwell for sure. I think there was a former uh, city councilor who got put in charge of their pro bono practice, and with the emphasis on civil rights work. And it sounds like they've done a lot of work with MacArthur Justice Center. On the west side of the state, you got Lathrop and Gage, Shikardi. A lot of those bigger firms will have, over the last 10, 20 years, have developed pro bono practices where they will have a pro bono coordinator, a senior lawyer whose sole job or, large part of their job is to find pro bono cases for their lawyers to handle, and then coordinate those things and make sure that the people are getting that representation. Those are the relationships. If I was in those organizations, would try to reach out and just meet and say, are there ways that we can funnel things to you? Are there ways that we can filter some of them out? Things that we think are meritorious. Any way that you can develop those relationships would be super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, it looks like we have just enough time for closing thoughts. Katie, Jim, or Ray, is there anything that I did not ask you that you wanted to mention that you felt like it would just be important for reporters or really anyone interested in this issue to know?
I'll just add in real quick on the records requests. Another resource for journalists is the Missouri Press Association. They have a hotline that you can call if you need help, if you get a denial or you need some help with wording on how to submit a sunshine request. And they've been super helpful on a couple of things for me. So we'll just throw that out there.
Awesome. And then the last thing actually that I'll add that you just reminded me of, somebody had asked a question earlier. I think it was Zay about the ongoing database. One thing that is ongoing is that we have started a database to crowdsource from reporters across the state, police officers who do not have ongoing post cases, but do have documented records of misconduct. So if they have been accused of something, charged of something, convicted of something, but there has been no post complaint brought yet, I think Michelle is going to share the link to that in the chat now. But if you come across that, if you find an officer that you're like, oh, it's weird that this officer say like hit this child, but there's no post complaint against them, you can feel free to add that to that database, and that is something that we are going to try to go through and be continuously reviewing and just vetting those claims. But it's just a way that we're hoping to sort of expand the collaboration in the coverage of these issues. Ray, I saw that oh, sorry, Jim, I see that you've been muted, and then Ray. So do you want to go first, Jim?
Just really briefly, I thought while we were doing this, when you're talking about places to find things in court records, I guess the other fertile area I would point people to is our motions to compel, because almost as a rule, cities and counties and the police board refuse to produce a lot of personnel records, and we constantly file motions to compel. And there'll be information sometimes in those. Again, a lot of it we can't share, but you might find some stuff in there, or at the hearings on the motions to compel, where there might be information that'll be helpful.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Thank you. Ray, any closing thoughts?
I was just going to add that someone brought up attending the police board meetings in the city. I would suggest doing the same thing in St. Louis County. And also just to piggyback on, the pro bono thing as far as leading or helping with litigation. There's also, and this is to throw it out to you guys at the Marshall Project, there's also a need for citizens to have someone help them effectively articulate the complaint against a police officer who they've encountered. And based on new Bill of Rights, those accusations or allegations have to be made in writing. And that is a deterrent for a large number of people to move through with the process of holding officers accountable for misconduct.
Yeah, that's super well said. And I will just say, since we are arriving at time, that one of the things that we do have that Katie put together as part of this database is what we call a data dictionary. And that has sort of a bunch of the terms that you'll see in some of these cases, sort of broken down into layman's terms. But included in that are some of the sort of common language around allegations. And so for people who are sort of trying to get familiar with, like, oh, an officer, like I had an interaction with an officer, but I'm not sure how to describe it, that is one really helpful place to look. Thank you guys so much. This has been a really wonderful, really generative hour. A huge thank you to our panelists for making yourselves available. We so appreciate you and your willingness to share the knowledge and information that you've gathered. And thank you to our participants for joining us. We really appreciate it. And the recording of this will be available on our website. So if you have friends, colleagues who weren't able to make it, we will be sending out an announcement in the coming days, just letting folks know that they can catch up on that on our site. Thank you all again so much, and have a good one. Bye.